show a 3-year academic trend. The 09-010 academic years use the reading math scores from 2006 through 2009, and 10-11 academic year use the reading and math scores from 07 to 10. The researcher created a database that combined dependent variables and independent variables. Of course, the dependent variables were academic achievement, measured by changes in math and reading scores, and the independent variables were the employment status of superintendents. The database included data that described every school system in those 3 academic years. Descriptive statistics were used because the entire population of school systems were included. Now, in your handouts, you are looking at Figure 1, and you will see that here are the results of this data. When looking at involuntary change compared to continued employment status, you see that in math, the group that was in the involuntary change group scored a 0.38, so they had a positive change, and the continuous employment group was at negative 0.61, and you see the difference, 0.99. Same was true in reading, where the involuntary change group outscored the continuous employment group by a difference of 0.48. So in this situation, places where there was involuntary change are actually scoring higher than places where there was stability. Figure 2, you see that involuntary change, and compared to the school systems there had been recent change, that there was a big difference in scores here. School systems where an involuntary change took place that year actually had higher scores by a wide margin in math, the difference of 1.42 compared to those systems who had a recent change, and in reading the difference was 0.97. And also, as you can see with the recent change groups, negative growth for math, negative 1.04, and reading, negative 0.82. Your Figure 3 chart shows that the involuntary change group and the voluntary change group, there was not a whole lot of difference there, although the involuntary change group did outscore the voluntary change group in both math and reading, but the differences that we see there are not as significant as they were with the recent change. And the next one, Figure 4, you can see all the groups on one chart showing that by far, actually the highest performing group in math was the groups where there was involuntary change, which really makes no sense. So basically there was involuntary change taking place, and in those situations, their 3-year academic trend of student achievement was actually greater than any of these other groups. And you see, also we have the all schools score. So all schools put together, the growth was actually negative 0.64, which is very similar to the continuous employment group. Then you have the involuntary change group scoring much higher, and then you can see by the chart that the recently changed group was by far the lowest scoring. So that's true in math, and it's also true in reading as you look at Figure 5. You see basically the same thing. That when compared to all, the involuntary change group is by far the highest scoring group. And when there was a recent change, they were basically the lowest scoring group. Figure 6 shows those school systems where in elective situations where there was an incumbent loser and incumbent winner. And both math and reading, you can see that basically when there were incumbents running for office, in situations where the incumbent lost, the academic achievement is actually much higher than those situations where the incumbent won. In math, a difference of 1.88, one of the most significant differences, and in reading, a difference of 2.90. Figure 7 shows the elected position where there's continuous employment and the appointed position where there's continuous employment. In this situation, you can see where the elected continuous employment is also slightly better than appointed, but not a great difference, 0.37. And basically there was no difference in reading scores when there was continuous employment, whether it was elected or appointed, 0.01 difference. And the last figure you see on your handouts, Figure 8, you have the elected involuntary change and appointed involuntary change. And as you can see, in elections, when the citizens are voting superintendents out of office, the scores are actually much higher in situations where this is happening in an appointed situation. a difference of 2.88 in math, a difference of 1.99 in reading. So what are the findings of this study? Finding number one, where involuntary change is occurring, academic achievement does not appear to be a factor causing the change. This is supported in the literature when basically low student achievement was consistently not identified as a main reason for involuntary removal. And Snyder also indicated that superintendents are rarely fired for not accomplishing improved student achievement. So, the results demonstrated that having positive academic achievement and growth greater than the state average and higher than comparison groups is not a high priority for stakeholders when determining the job continuation status of superintendents. The second finding, and possibly an unintended consequence, one must consider the possibility that raising student achievement may be causing other issues that make the superintendent vulnerable to involuntary change. Raising student achievement takes a lot of hard work. It's often the result of changing the status quo. While this does not seem possible, we have to realize that accelerated growth in student achievement could lead to involuntary removal. So one must consider the explanation that stakeholders simply were unwilling to change or to continue continue necessary tasks required under existing leadership. As noted by Farrell, change is going to upset someone, and often boards of education are unprepared for change. Finding number three, change is an obstacle that school systems must overcome to have positive academic growth. This data showed that school systems that experienced recent change was the lowest performing group. The problems caused by superintendent turnover are well documented in the research. The cycle of superintendent dismissal, search and selection, reorganization, and mid-dismissal again was a huge obstacle to school district's number one priority of improving student learning. The fourth finding, stability and employment status of the superintendent indicates only a slight advantage regarding positive academic growth. Now, the McGrail study said that superintendent tenure matters when the right work is done the right way. This finding does show that there is some student academic growth there when you have continuous employment, but it's not a lot of difference than the all group. Finding number five, in the elected position, superintendents experiencing greater student achievement growth are more likely to lose their reelection than superintendents where student achievement is not keeping pace with the state growth. These elected superintendents may be focusing their efforts on creating harmony within the school system by building relationships instead of the change often associated with student achievement. So regardless of the focus of the elected superintendents, the data indicates that high student achievement growth is not enough to re-elect superintendents, and that below average student achievement growth does not cause elected superintendents to lose re-election. Finding number six, when decision makers allow the continued employment status of superintendents, the impact of academic achievement seems to be very similar for boards that appoint the superintendent and for citizens that elect the superintendent. There is not a great difference in the academic performance of appointed and elected superintendents when the employment status is continuous. Finding number seven, when decision makers discontinue the employment of a superintendent, the decisions of boards that terminate the appointment of a superintendent are more aligned with academic achievement results than the citizens that voted to not re-elect the superintendent. What are the implications of this study? Number one, successful superintendents must do more. Achieving high academic growth is not enough if a superintendent wants to have continued employment status. Superintendents who have the ability to lead their systems academically must pay careful attention to the many factors that could disrupt their job status and consequently impact student achievement. While the roles and responsibilities are many, the one area of predominant literature regarding longevity was that of relationship building and working with people. As Carter and Cunningham stated, Superintendents are not really evaluated